Good morning, boys and girls. Does anybody know what holiday is coming up? Thanksgiving, yes. Oh, I love Thanksgiving. We always fry a turkey. I don't know if you guys know what that means, but we put a big pan in the backyard and fill it with oil and drop the turkey in and fry it that way. We live on a pond, so every time we drop that turkey in, here comes the alligator because he smells it's cooking. He's not come up on the bank. Well, no, last year he did. Not all the way through our yard, just peeks his head out. It's kind of cool, kind of creepy. But this week we're going to be doing Thanksgiving stuff to get ready for the holiday. So today we are going to read the story of the Pilgrims. Okay. Once upon a time, in the land of England, there lived a small group of people called Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were unhappy because the King of England would not let them worship God in their own way. So, the Pilgrims weren't happy because they wanted to worship God in their own way, and the King of England would not let them. So, the Pilgrims packed up their belongings and said a tearful goodbye to their homes. So they were standing up for themselves, right? And their friends and the world they knew. On a mild day in autumn, that's fall, they set sail for a new world called America, which was across the wide ocean. Other families came along. Together, they hoped to find freedom and a better life. I think they were very brave. More than 100 people squeezed into a small wooden sailing ship called the Mayflower. 22 of the Pilgrims were children. For their journey, they brought with them only the simplest foods, things like hard cheese, bread, dried beans, and salted meat. Day after day, the Pilgrims saw nothing but endless ocean and sky. Now and then, the huge slippery body of a whale would break the surface of the water. Ooh, I've never seen a whale before in real life. On and on they sailed through calm days and stormy ones until after 66 days at sea. That's a long time. That's like 2 months on a boat. They heard the words they had been dreaming of for so long. Land ho! It's a long time on a boat. I get seasick on boats. Nearer and nearer to the land they sailed until the water was so shallow they could go no further. They dropped anchor in a peaceful bowl-shaped harbor rimmed with sparkling white sand. Dense woods rose up all around. There were no towns, no houses. There was no sign of any people at all. How do you think they were feeling right now? Probably a little excited, probably a little scared. The Pilgrims rowed ashore to explore this wild land so full of mystery and promise. The men were armed with guns. They had heard that America was full of fierce animals and savage Indians. After many days of exploring up and down the coast, they found a deep harbor near good farmland. Here they would make their home. They call it Plymouth. While some stood guard against Indians, the others began to build houses. The first one was long and low and very plain. They called it the common house, for they would all share it. Crowded. As each day grew a little colder and a little darker, they worked quickly. Winter was coming. So I guess they built that big house because it would be easier to build one big one rather than a whole bunch of small ones. So that way, at least they all had shelter. And then they would work on the smaller ones. And a terrible winter it was. There were dark days of bleak and bitter cold, far colder than they had known back in England. Snow and sleet and high winds battered the common house, and the little ship anchored in the harbor. The Pilgrims huddled together for warmth, trying to survive on stale food from the long voyage. Many of them became sick and died. They had a tough start, didn't they? By the time spring came, there were only 50 pilgrims alive. Do you remember how many they started with? 100 or so? So about half of them died. And there were mostly children. What would they do if the Indians attacked? Surely they would be too weak to fight back. Then one day, an Indian did come. The pilgrims had never seen an Indian this close. We call them Native Americans now. And they were terrified. But this Indian had come in peace. His name was Samoset. A few days later, more Indians marched to their village, 60 of them led by a warrior chief. The Pilgrims and the Indians made a treaty, which is like a promise, promising not only to do each other no harm, but also to help each other. An Indian named Squanto turned out to be a special friend. He taught the Pilgrims many things, where to find the best fish and how to stamp eels out of the mud at low tide. No, thank you. How to find their way safely through the dark forest, and where to find nuts and berries and wild herbs. Very good. So they eventually became friends with the Native Americans who helped them, and then they made a promise that they would help each other and not hurt each other. And Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to plant wonderful food. It was called corn. In each seed mound, they buried a small fish to help the corn grow. So they would dig a little hole out, and then they would put a dead fish in there, and then the seed, like fertilizer. All that first summer in the New World, the Pilgrims fished and hunted and tended their crops. They built more houses to live in and sheds in which to store their supplies. The children worked and explored and played with their few simple toys. Thank goodness for Squanto. And now, when autumn came, remember that's fall, so it's been another year, the Pilgrims rejoiced over their harvest. Bright ears of corn and fat pumpkins, peas, beans, delicious squash, and green herbs. They felt so happy about their good fortune that they wanted to celebrate. They knew they could never have survived without the Indians. So the Pilgrims invited the Indians to join them in the feast. 90 Indians came. And what do you think they called it? For 3 days and nights, the Pilgrims and the Indians ate and drank and danced and played games together. To remember that time so long ago, a time of brave Pilgrims and life-saving Indians, we continue to celebrate that feast. And what do we call it? 3 days. A long time to party. We call it Thanksgiving. Did you learn something? I bet you did. Now what your job is going to be is you need to get a sheet of paper. Okay. You need to fold it in half. We call this hamburger, right? Because if you fold the other way, it's long like a hot dog bun. Okay. Then I want you to draw a line down the middle and label the top the Pilgrims. You might need to pause me to go get some paper. Or you can use your reading notebook. You'll just have lines on your picture. That's fine too. So then if you use your reading notebook, then you would draw a line like where the middle hole is. Okay? What you're going to do now is you are going to illustrate any part of that story. You can illustrate what you remember, or you can always go back and pause it on the picture. You can illustrate Thanksgiving food. You can illustrate the first Thanksgiving. You can illustrate them coming on the boat or meeting Squanto. Okay? Your favorite part of the book. The winter. So you can illustrate anything about the Pilgrims that you want to. Okay? The Mayflower, anything about the Pilgrims that you want to illustrate. And under here, under the title, I need for you to write one thing that you learned from the story. One fact, okay? So you're going to write a fact. I would write a fact first, and then you know how much paper you have to draw your picture. Okay? Your picture doesn't have to match your fact. They can be two different things. Okay? That way I know that you were learning and listening. So label your paper the Pilgrims. Write your one fact, or two or three. It doesn't, at least one. Okay? If you want to write more, that's great. Then I want you to illustrate the Pilgrims. You have to do this because tomorrow we're going to do another story and another fact, and you're going to have to post a picture. So you got to do it for your grade. Okay, one last time. Pilgrims, one fact that you learned, and illustrate something about the Pilgrims that you want. Okay? And tomorrow we're going to continue learning about Thanksgiving. I, for one, am getting hungry for that turkey.